this company is just being so cynical about what it says its core value is, which is improving the environment and, environmentally sustainable mobility. And so it was like, if the company is so cynical about technology and the environment, it's the two pillars of its brand. I had this moment where it's like, there's never just one cockroach. Like, and you find a cockroach like that, you find that level of cynicism in a company like that as a journalist is when there's more.
Hey, I'm Aaron Naparstak. Welcome to The War on Cars. Ed Niedermeyer is an automotive industry journalist and the author of Ludicrous, the unvarnished story of Tesla Motors. In it, Niedermeyer cuts through the hype and peels back the high-tech veneer to reveal a car company and a CEO more intent on manufacturing public opinion than environmentally friendly transportation. One of the best and most emblematic stories in Ludicrous takes place over Memorial Day weekend, 2015. Tesla had recently announced that it would be demonstrating a new battery swapping system at an electric car charging point between Los Angeles and San Francisco on one of the busiest travel weekends of the year. In a flashy press conference, accompanied by thumping techno music, Tesla CEO Elon Musk demonstrated how the new system would work. A Tesla Model S drove on stage and stopped directly above a rectangular hole in the floor. After a minute and a half of unseen activity beneath the stage, the car drove away with its instrument panel showing a fully charged battery. The audience of Tesla fans went wild as Musk promised that the new battery swapping system would be twice as fast as filling the tank of a gasoline car. Ed Niedermeyer was fascinated. He had reported extensively on an electric car company that had spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying and failing to develop a similar battery swapping system just a couple of years earlier. He wanted to know how Tesla was going to make this work, so he packed his bags and headed off for a long, broiling hot holiday weekend at a truck stop in the middle of California's Central Valley.
Yeah, so Harris Ranch is a big cattle ranch, and there's like a feedlot nearby, so the whole place kind of smells like cow. And it's not exactly the ideal place to spend an entire Memorial Day weekend, but that's what I did. I went and spent 4 days there. And sure enough, like on the first day, people start coming in to use the superchargers that are there, and the lines start building.
As the Teslas piled up at the supercharger station, Niedermeyer never saw anyone making use of a new battery swapping system. In fact, he never saw any sign that a battery swapping system existed at all.
And there was more traffic than the superchargers could serve. But instead of opening the swap station, they had these chargers. People were waiting in these long lines. If you think about it, it takes 45 minutes for each Tesla about to charge. If you have two people in line, that's an hour and a half before you can even plug in. Kids screaming in the back seats, people losing their patience. And, I talked to people and they said, yeah, like I would pay any amount of money to be able to use a battery swap station and just go right now.
Finally, on Saturday, workers from Tesla showed up.
And then on day 2, someone comes in and I think, oh, okay, maybe they're going to use the battery swap station now. Well, instead what happened was they brought in a bunch of extra superchargers and hooked them up to diesel generators.
You heard that right. Still no battery swapping, just dirty, noisy, glacier-melting diesel generators connected directly to Tesla superchargers.
And the Tesla owners I talked to were really uncomfortable about the fact that they were sitting here and having a reporter asking them, like, how do you feel about this not so long tailpipe, right? They call it the long tailpipe problem, is like, what are the emissions where the electricity is being generated?
Niedermeyer spent 4 days there. He never saw a single Tesla swap its batteries.
And I was like, okay, so this is fake, right? And then I reached out to the company. They frankly lied to me. And I started doing the research and I found out the whole thing was really just a way to game the California zero emission vehicle credit system.
Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit wonky and complicated, but it's kind of the most important part, so stay with me here. The state of California was trying to incentivize electric car makers to develop faster battery charging technology. So in 2013, they revised their zero-emissions vehicle credit system so that cars that were able to charge 80% of their battery in under 15 minutes earned almost twice as many credits as cars that charged more slowly. The credits were worth a lot of money to the automakers, and battery swapping was a way to earn them. There was a bit of a loophole in the rules, though. To earn the extra credits, a company only needed to show that battery swapping was possible. It didn't matter if car owners were actually using this capability. Demonstrating it on just one vehicle at a big, headline-generating press event, even hidden beneath a stage where no one could actually see how it worked, was apparently enough. After the big battery swapping press conference, Tesla nearly doubled the zero-emissions vehicle credits earned by its entire fleet of cars.
And there was no mechanism in those rules to force or even encourage these companies to actually swap the actual batteries in the actual cars on the road that were earning these double credits. They really just had to do it once, and it was just assumed like, oh, this is just a thing that's happening now.
In 2014 alone, Tesla made $217 million from zero-emission vehicle credits. And though Musk repeatedly downplayed their importance, the credits were crucial. They enabled Tesla to report quarterly profits instead of losses. And reporting quarterly profits allowed Tesla to borrow cash to pay off loans from the federal government. Paying off the loans sent Tesla's stock price soaring. Niedermeyer had apparently discovered that the battery swapping system that Elon Musk had touted on stage at a huge press event in front of the entire world didn't actually exist in any practical, usable form. So Niedermeyer began publishing his findings and asking Tesla more questions.
And that's sort of, one of the points at which the relationship got a little bit tense.
You mean your relationship with the company?
Yeah. For me, it was like, okay, look, like you have two things happening here, right? You have on the battery swap side, you have this technological facade that's propping up ultimately a financial facade, which is that this company can be economically viable, which it was depending on those credits to pretend that it was. And then on the other side, on the charger side, it was like this company is just being so cynical about what it says its core value is, which is improving the environment and, environmentally sustainable mobility. And so it was like, if the company is so cynical about technology and the environment, it's the two pillars of its brand. I had this moment where it's like, there's never just one cockroach. Like, and you find a cockroach like that, you find that level of cynicism in a company like that as a journalist is when there's more. Like, there's always going to be more. And so that's when I started digging into like every aspect of the company.
And we'll be digging into all of that and more with Ed Niedermeyer after this word from our sponsor. When our family visited the Netherlands some years back, one of our kids got a little bit whiny about biking in the rain. Our Dutch friend told him, "You're not made of sugar." In other words, hop on that bike. You're not going to dissolve in the rain, kid. You just need the right rain gear. When it's wet outside, all of us here at the War on Cars wear Cleverhood. Cleverhood's capes and anoraks look great while they keep you dry. Thoughtful details like reflective threading make you visible on the street at night. Cleverhood also donates 5% of profits to advocacy groups working to create safer, more livable, and equitable streets in cities around the U.S. For a 20% discount on Cleverhood's capes and anoraks, go to cleverhood.com/waroncars. Enter coupon code WEATHERPROOF when you check out. Code is good through the end of July. Again, that's cleverhood.com/waroncars. Coupon code WEATHERPROOF for a 20% discount. You're not made of sugar. Edward Niedermeyer, welcome to the War on Cars.
Thanks so much for having me. This is very exciting.
In recent years, more people have started to get the feeling that Tesla is a scam or a fraud. And it's things like the Boring Company tunnels, where we were presented this idea that there are going to be these tunnels that are very, high tech and futuristic and move people, at high speed through cities or wherever. And then we see them and they're just these kind of one-lane car tunnels with flashing LED lights, moving Tesla cars at like 15 miles per hour or whatever. But you feel like there are other deeper aspects of fraud and scam in the company. Where do you see that happening?
Well, so first of all, the tunnels, I think you're absolutely right. That was one. There was a guy, an account called Tesla Charts, who was he was a short seller. And he had this saying that there was what he called the realization. And that was when Elon Musk got into your field of expertise and suddenly you realized, wait, this guy does not know what he's talking about. And at this point, he's been getting into so many different fields, whether it's brain, neurology or infrastructure or these other things that like a lot of people over the years have been having this realization sort of more and more. But yeah, so when I wrote the book, like I said, I was trying to illustrate these broader patterns, and from the very beginning, or at least from the very early days, there was always sort of this like willingness to kind of push the truth or do what it takes, like we believe in this mission so much that we're willing to do things that others wouldn't necessarily do. But really the most important thing that I think is illustrated in the book is this pattern of, which is very common in Silicon Valley of, you get into a business that you don't really understand with the, amazing confidence that tech guys seem to have. And you realize, oh, this is harder than I thought it was. We need to raise more money than we thought we needed. And so now we need to come up with another big promise to get that money so that we can fix our current problem. And then you get into this treadmill, right? The fundraising treadmill. And those promises that you then have to make to bring in, more investor cash, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think one of the unique things about Elon Musk is that, it's not that pattern. That pattern is super common in Silicon Valley, but it's all transacted between private startups and venture capitalists. And it's like part of their culture that's sort of an acceptable thing to do, that venture capitalists almost want to be a little bit like, they want the founders to be so aspirational that line between what's real and what's aspiration gets fuzzy. And what Musk has done is take that into the public markets, where no longer are you dealing with accredited investors, which is a specific class, right? That's defined in the SEC rules. You have to have a certain amount of money, and you're assumed to be sophisticated enough to take on higher levels of risk. And Musk is really just taking that into the public markets, where it's just moms and pops and pension funds and things like that. And so, the lies and the overpromising and the deceptions and things, they start out small, but then, going into each crisis, the deceptions get bigger, and then the promises to get them out get bigger.
And I think they get more dangerous too, right? Because
Yes.
we're not just talking about financial scamminess and fraud
Yep.
here. We're talking about somebody who's putting cars on the road that are being billed as, full self-driving robot cars, and
Yep.
but they're fundamentally being tested on public streets.
Yes. And
that's
autopilot,
dangerous.
it is. And autopilot and full self-driving is where that pattern sort of achieves what I think is sort of the escape velocity, right? When you get that centrifugal force and it just flies off into really scary places. And, people don't realize that before Tesla ever talked about autopilot or self-driving or any kind of driving automation tech, Google had actually developed a system called Autopilot. And it was like Tesla's. It was what's called a level 2 driver assistance system, which means it appears to be driving, right? But it requires a human to be fully engaged all the time. Now, over the course of 2012, this system had been developed and refined a lot. Google tested it internally, let people take it on their commutes to and from campus, and found that people just did not keep paying attention. And no matter how often they were warned or told this is dangerous, people would bring out their laptops and put on makeup and eat food and do all this stuff. And if you read the research that predates these kinds of driving automation technology, that's no surprise. This is going to happen. It's inevitable. It has nothing to do with the skill of the driver or anything like that. And Tesla was in a deal to get bought by Google right around the time that Google decided not to bring this to market. And so he put this system to market that Google knew was unsafe. And I think he had to have known that Google knew it was unsafe. He did nothing to address the safety concerns that Google had with it, and told people, oh, it's practically self-driving, which, by the way, people then overtrust the system even more when you tell them, oh, this is basically self-driving, and they don't know better. Then they treat it like it's self-driving, which means that they're not paying attention when the system runs up on something it can't handle. And people have died. People have died in Teslas that have driven at high speeds into stationary objects. And if you think about that, that's a very unusual failure mode in driving. There's a lot of ways to die, to injure yourself and others in a car, right? It's a very dangerous thing, but this is an entirely new way to fail that Elon Musk introduced with autopilot. And again, there's no way he can't have known, or if he didn't know that these safety risks were real, he was negligent. And then when NTSB investigated multiple fatal crashes and said, Tesla, you've got design problems that are allowing people to overtrust the system and die, they did nothing. They have done nothing. And so I think, if you look at Tesla purely as an electric vehicle company, sort of especially prior to that 2013, 2016, when full self-driving came out, which took it all a step further, you can say, well, they're an electric vehicle company, they're scrappy, so maybe they bend some rules, but it was for the greater good. Like, you can make some, you can kind of, I think reasonable people can kind of disagree. But I think when you get into that automated driving, that was the point at which it became, to me, unambiguously malign. And then with full self-driving, it became unambiguously fraudulent. And the whole thing was about inducing people to believe that autopilot was more self-driving than it really was, so that Tesla would be perceived as a leader. And so literally what it was like inducing people, the people who trusted Tesla the most, to crash and die in order for their stock to make more money, in order for Elon Musk to become the richest man in the world. And to me, it's like, yes, it's a new technological area. Yes, it's complex. Yes, the regulator is not set up to understand and handle these problems, but as a problem, it's pretty clear cut, right? Like, you don't want to have the richest man in the world be getting there by inducing people to make driving even more dangerous than it already is.
Tesla is certainly not the only car company or company, period, working on autonomous vehicle technology. Do you believe that technology is simply, all kind of fantasy tech, or is there some version of it that could be useful?
So this is one of the most frustrating things, I think, for me, and there's a lot of frustrating things in all of this, but I actually, so autonomous vehicle technology is real. It absolutely exists, and it can exist, and it will exist. And I think it will be one of the most important technologies of the 21st century. And I say that not in the triumphalist, it's all going to be good sense. I say that specifically because I hope the kinds of people, especially who listen to this show, understand that it's not guaranteed to be any one thing. It's a technology that is still has the potential to be a lot of different things, and it will be what we make of it. And I think it's one of the, so Elon Musk is, I think if you go and you ask people on the street, you take 10 people and you say, name a company that's a leader in the self-driving space, they'll say Tesla. And the reason that's the case is because Tesla is the company that is selling the traditional dream of a self-driving car, the thing that Detroit was talking about in the 50s and even earlier, about a car that you're going to own. It's just like a car. You own it. It goes everywhere you want. It just happens to drive itself. People don't realize Tesla's the only company selling that. And this is what I mean. This is the most extreme example of him taking a technology and fitting it to contorting it to fit his business, because he's in the business of selling cars. And so for him, autonomous vehicles are buy this car, so that you will get this capability down the road. It's an incentive to buy his car. Whereas everyone else in the space, no one is talking about selling self-driving cars to people. It's all about robotaxis, shuttles, delivery, semi-trucks, and sort of logistics. And what you have to understand is that the core technology in self-driving cars is, machine learning, AI. The term, and it's so counterintuitive because it's a longer, more complex phrase, but I think it helps people understand what's really going on with it, is probabilistic inference. Okay. And so it's essentially using statistics to make informed guesses about the world around you. Now, if you think about that, right, if you live in a fishbowl, you can create a data set fairly easily that allows you to make pretty accurate probabilistic inferences about the world around you, because that world is small. Okay, and that's why every other AV company is developing what's called level 4 technology. And again, even this is misleading because people think, oh, well, 5 is more autonomous than 4, or. But no, level 4 and level 5 are both fully autonomous, no need for any human oversight or input. But level 4 simply says we're going to do this constrained within a certain area. And that area can be, a college campus where there's no other cars. It can be, a neighborhood. It can be a city. So level 4 itself is a really wide variety of things. But ultimately what it means is it's a fleet operating in a constrained environment. And the other thing they do is they say, even with the constrained operating domain, which helps your probabilistic inference be more accurate, you also need hundreds of thousands or at least tens of thousands worth of sensors to make sure that the data you're getting about the world around you is really accurate. Whereas with Tesla, not only are they trying to make inferences about literally the entire anywhere that a human could drive, right? So an unconstrained domain, but they're doing it with cameras alone, which means that, there's all kinds of opportunities for cameras to misperceive things. And so you're operating with very, very far from perfect knowledge about the world around you. And therefore the performance of your probabilistic inference is also degraded. And so what Tesla's doing, right? And they're doing that because, and again, this is what I mean about him contorting the technology to fit his business model. He's doing it because for him, the variable that he can't change is that he wants to sell cars to people.
Right.
And so you have to have them be cameras because cameras are cheaper. LiDAR and radar are too expensive, so you can't have them. And so they have to sell level 5. And so again, but the reason it's succeeding is not because it's plausible. And everyone in the AV sector, if you ask them, will tell you till they're blue in the face, what they're selling is in no way plausible. The reason it's succeeding is because it's what people want to hear. It's the self-driving car that they've been expecting this whole time. Whereas the other companies are saying, our fleet of robotaxis will give you a ride when you want it. And people are like, well, what's the difference between that and an Uber? Why do I care?
Right. So like people aren't really excited about, oh yeah, I could get into this golf cart robotaxi and it could take me around a finite section of a well-known, place like Manhattan, like a place with like a nice clear street grid or whatever. People really just want to be sold a car, I guess, in the way that they in their sort of fixed mental model of what a car is.
That's exactly right. And this is why Tesla has been successful. They have said, we're going to take electric vehicle technology and get it as close to people's basic understanding of what a car is and should be that's been developed for a century. So they have this veneer of futurism where people think like, oh, I bought this car, this experience, it feels like a smartphone. It's so different than other cars. It's so quick, whatever, all the things that people like about it is this veneer of futurism that asks them to change nothing, right? They're still buying a large, heavy, powerful, frankly, difficult to control sometimes, status imbuing luxury car, premium car. And it asks nothing of them. Whereas if you're in the robotaxi business, you are in some ways making the pitch to people like, maybe you don't need to own your car. Maybe there's a fixed fleet of autonomous vehicles can serve, a huge number of rides. There's real efficiencies there. But as a consumer, that car that's parked outside 90% of the time, that's not a bug. That's a feature. You want it sitting there being wasteful,
right? So
that it's ready when you want it.
Sitting in the space where we could have our dedicated bike lanes and our bus lanes and wider sidewalks and all the things we really need in a city.
Exactly. And I think this is what I really hope people understand is that, Elon Musk has talked about features like, you'll be able to like get out of your car and it'll follow you around like a dog. Instead of parking, the car will just circle the streets. We are so lucky that he has not been able to promise on this absurd technology or deliver on this absurd technology that he's promising, because if he did, cities would be so much worse, because that we would have literally, single occupant vehicles are a problem that cities are trying to address. We would have zero occupancy vehicles, right? Adding to that problem, making it worse. Whereas if you have an autonomous vehicle fleet, each one of those things is so expensive, especially in these early iterations, that the only way to make it work is to literally make sure that they are utilized as close to 100% of the time as possible. And so a level 4 robotaxi fleet, their incentives, it's very distinctly different than Uber and Lyft. Their incentive is to have as few vehicles as possible serving as many rides as possible. Their goal is ultimately to serve all the rides in a city, right, with as few vehicles as possible.
Just backing up a step there, I mean, I feel like, Ed, in some ways what you just described, the fewest number of vehicles serving the most number of people in the city, to me, you just described the bus in a way.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we have that. We invented that a while ago. It's the bus, it's the subway. And maybe when you don't need to go a long distance, you hop on a bicycle or some other vehicle. And I guess, one of the questions I have for you is like, what does your version of progress look like? And we have all these new technologies, but it's a question of like, do we even need these new technologies? Like the technologies we had in 1890, trains, subways, bicycles. These technologies are pretty good and can still be used today. Like, is this tech sort of distracting us from the actual solutions that we need, which are perhaps more simpler?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And it's one I think I kind of grapple with like almost every day in some form or another. I mean, when I started writing about cars, I hadn't owned a car or for like 5 years at the time. And so, my background, I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, where you definitely don't need a car. I grew up biking. So for me, progress is about moving from the monoculture that we have now, the car monoculture that we have now, where we take a car, whether we're going a mile or 500 miles. And by the way, I mean, 95% of trips, of vehicle trips in the US are 30 miles or shorter, right? So this is the other thing that Tesla's had this really pernicious effect on is convincing people you have to make EVs that are road trip capable, that can have hundreds, 300 miles, whatever, 400 miles of range. This is less than 5% of the trips that people actually take. And you split that battery in half, you can have 250-mile cars. That's more than 3 times the average, miles that a person drives each day. Or you can have, however many e-bikes, right? And so I think, especially as supply constraints, build up around battery, supply chain infrastructure, I think those are some hard choices we're going to have to make. And I really think it's crazy for us to say EVs can't succeed until they're all 300, 400 miles. We'll never get to where we need to go that way.
Just to try to sum up what I think you're saying here and in your book is that Tesla gives us this kind of veneer of futurism, right? It gives us the sense that we're looking at something completely brand new and high tech and world changing. But ultimately, what they really are is just like the classic American car company. They're selling us this very old idea.
Yeah, like to the point where even their cars are really, they're classic American cars. They're big, they're heavy, they don't have tight turning circles, so they're not good in cities and in Europe, right? And they're like drag racing machines. They don't like, it's not like a Porsche where you want to get it out on a back road. It's literally just for that traffic light thing. It's the most Detroit vehicle possible. It's even manufactured poorly, right? They even have terrible panel gaps like the Detroit cars in the 70s did.
Right.
It is as classic American a car as you can get. And again, it just shows you that little veneer of Silicon Valley gloss on top of it, like prevents people from seeing that at all, which is frankly, again, it's Elon Musk's brilliance as a brander and as an exploiter of these like subconscious prejudices and beliefs that are buried down deep in all of our brains.
Is there some value to that, though? So you've got like this guy who's an amazing showman and salesman. And so he is fundamentally selling us an old idea that we understand. We all understand the car, and we have this whole infrastructure in place to market and sell cars. And Musk is very good at that. But he's selling us electric cars. And fundamentally, we need to get off gasoline. We need to get off fossil fuels. So there is a way in which, he's doing something that we need to do, and he's figured out how to sell us electric cars that we will actually buy, because people have been trying to sell electric cars for decades, frankly, and it hasn't worked. Is there something there that we can say, okay, like Musk is a kind of fraudster, but he is using it for some ultimately like good purpose, moving us toward this, electric mobility future, just in the same way that, we called the first cars horseless carriages. Like they were sold to us in a way, like we understood horse-drawn carriages. So they sold us the first gasoline-powered cars as horseless carriages. And maybe that's all Musk is doing here And it's a process that we need to go through.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that he is his specific genius is as you say, it's perfect for this transition period. And I think like the whole showing that EVs can do road trips thing is a great example of this, where it needed to be done to open people's minds at all, right? Like a lot of Americans, like they would not even consider this unless they knew, like, okay, there's a dedicated charging network. It's got these 350 mile, whatever range batteries, like, you know, but again, like that's not a scalable solution over the long term. And I think that's kind of that's the danger of Musk, right? And I think where it gets really pernicious is where, you know, he has become now such a dominant presence that like everything revolves around him. And every time a company comes out and tries to talk about something they're doing with technology, it has to be shoved into his frame of reference. And that's really pernicious because it prevents us from understanding that the technology has so many different possible futures. And I think that that's what excites me about covering this technology and moving from cars into covering technology, is that there are so many different ways this can go, so many different directions. And that's what Elon Musk is now that he's sort of played his role. He's now holding people back from understanding that. And again, one of my frustrations is that because he's so dominant, people think all AVs are cars that you're going to buy and that are going to drive themselves. And again, he's literally the only one. But because he's so dominant, you know, everyone just assumes all the other companies are lined up behind him, and they absolutely aren't. And there are much better futures that are possible with this technology. And you know, understanding them is going to really require kind of getting him out of this dominant space that he's in.
So what do we do about Elon Musk? What do we do about Tesla? It just feels like this 800-pound gorilla that is always in the room now. And we just see this company preventing a lot of progress from taking place. And, you know, like transit projects stop because Elon Musk is going to build a tunnel instead or whatever. What can we do about it?
Well, it's an interesting question, because for me personally, because, you know, I wrote this book. It'll have come out 3 years ago in August, and, you know, it sold okay, but like not what I was hoping for. And it's taken, again, almost 3 years. And now all of a sudden, like the sales are going up, you know, again, and I'm being asked to write about this stuff. And there's a real vibe shift happening. And I think it's because, you know, Musk has become so detached from reality and so detached from any kind of constraint. And I think as this stuff gets, you know, goes on, it just gets more and more obvious to more and more people, like, wait a second, this guy was supposed to be a genius. And yet now that he's talking about something that I understand, like I'm having a hard time understanding why people think he's a genius. So I think, like, to some respects, he needs to be sort of allowed to just keep going. Cause like, I think he has a death wish. Like he wants to push this as far as it possibly can go. And I think the government regulators on the auto safety side, at least, are wise to him. I think that you're going to see in the next year or two, maybe even less, that you're going to see some action on like autopilot and full self-driving and things like that. He was very well, you know, designed to avoid our societal immune responses, but I think they're finally slowly starting to kick in, and I think that's really good. And I think that, you know, it's not going to be enough to just stop him. I think what's really important is that we learn the right lessons from his experience, that we understand why he was so successful, why it took so long for him to be stopped, and why he was able to sell totally implausible things and not have anyone really seriously question it. Because I think the answers to those questions, you know, tell us a lot about the future opportunities that we have with these new technologies and the pitfalls that we face. And I think that beyond just dealing with him, again, I see him as he's going to ultimately be a victim of gravity. Like, he's defied gravity, and it's just a matter of time before gravity gets him. What's not inevitable is that we as a society take the right lessons from it. And I think that's the really important part.
That's it for this episode of The War on Cars. You can buy a copy of Ed's book, Ludicrous, the unvarnished story of Tesla Motors, in the War on Cars store on bookshop.org. Check out Ed's podcast, the Autonocast. Follow him on Twitter as well. You can find links in our show notes. Thanks to our sponsors, Rad Power Bikes and Cleverhood. For 20% off on the best rain gear for biking and walking, go to cleverhood.com/waroncars and enter code WEATHERPROOF. Code is good through the end of July. Likewise, there are always great deals available at radpowerbikes.com. If you would like some War on Cars stickers, apparel, water bottles, other swag, you can either go shopping in the store at thewaroncars.org or become a Patreon supporter. Click Support Us, and starting at just $3 per month, we will send you all kinds of great stuff. A shout out to our top Patreon sponsors, Charlie G. of Human Powered Law in Portland, Oregon, the Law Office of Vaccaro & White in New York City, Virginia Baker, and James Doyle. This episode was produced and edited by me, Aaron Naparstak. It was recorded by Josh Wilcox at the Brooklyn Podcasting Studio. On behalf of my co-hosts, Doug Gordon and Sarah Goodyear, this is the War on Cars.
The lesson embedded in this is, I think it's a really important one about America. And I think if you want to make changes in this country, you don't have to make your peace with it. You don't have to accept that it's unchangeable, but you have to accept that it's a real thing, which is that we are better at solving hard technological problems than we are at solving easy political problems.